Welcome to our first webinar from Akuho for the 2021 year. This one is aptly named Virtually Unprecedented, your 2021 job search, because those are the times we live in. We love that word. We loved it last year. We loved it this year. So we're going to keep following that theme. But to introduce everyone, let's get started. So I'll have Jocelyn and I introduce ourselves, and then we'll get started with Carrie as our first panelist. Jocelyn, do you want to say hi first?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our panelists for serving. We're so excited about this topic as it is and has been ongoing for a lot of our membership groups. I am Jocelyn Moses, Director of Membership Development for Makuho, as well as Director of Residence and Student Life at Goldie Beacom College in Wilmington, Delaware. Thank you so much for being here.
And hi, everyone. I'm just co-moderating today. My name is Amanda Slichter. I use she, her pronouns. I serve as the Director of Technology Initiatives for Makuho and also as an Assistant Director of Residence Life for Kutztown University. And I will have Carrie introduce herself next.
Hi everyone, my name is Carrie Haddock. I use the pronouns she, her, hers. I am the Director of Annual Programs for Makuho, and I am also the Director of Delaware Valley University's Housing and Residence Life program.
Thank you, Carrie. Next up, Mark, could you introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Mark Wade. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a Residence Hall Director at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
Thank you, Mark. Shayna, could you go next?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shayna Alston. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I serve as the Director of Housing Operations for Temple University. I have oversight of our human resources functions, both for our department and the Division of Student Affairs.
Thanks, Shayna. Colleen, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Colleen Bunn. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the Director of Residential Life and Housing at Hartwick College in Oneonta, New York. And I am formerly the Senior Housing Officer Engagement Coordinator at Makuho and ready to take on whatever new Makuho is going to bring me.
Awesome, thank you. And I believe last, but certainly not least, Chancey, could you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Chancey Page. I'm currently a residence coordinator at Holy Family University. I'm also one of the entry-level engagement coordinators for Makuho as well.
Awesome. Did I miss any of our panelists today? Okay. All right. Well, thank you again. As Jocelyn said, we're really grateful for your time. We know everyone's super busy, so we appreciate it. So we'll dive right in. And as a reminder, there are a couple folks on here, but hopefully this is helpful as well, posted on the website for people to use as a resource moving forward. So the first question that I have is, how did you creatively revamp your hiring or search process given the pandemic? So basically, what was the biggest shift from the norm? And if anyone wants to start with that, feel free. So whether that's from the candidate side or from the hiring side, what was like the biggest change that you made to your process?
I can jump in there. So obviously our biggest change is that we could not bring folks to campus. And I think we all live in a virtual space where Zoom is our best friend. We were fortunate to have our human resources was responsive. And so there is a software called Spark Hire that we're also able to use for entry for our initial interview screening. And what it will allow is for candidates to answer pre-recorded questions and record videos and then send it back to our department for review. And so that has been a tool that we've been able to utilize here. We also have designed Zoom in ways that we use breakout rooms and meetings to coordinate a interview process that's very similar to on campus. And then the only other piece that we've revamped, trying to be more mindful of being inclusive and having a more diverse candidate pool, we have decided to do blind application reviews. in the hopes that because we are virtual, we can do an initial screening with more people than we would before. And so in a process that you want to be more, you know, mindful of having a diverse pool, the more people who could get from the application screening to the phone interview or the initial interview, the more diverse your pool happens to be. And so we've used this opportunity to do that as well.
Thank you for that, Shayna. What was that website? I'm going to drop it in the chat. Was it Spark?
It's Spark Hire, and I actually think it's software that you may have to purchase. Our human resources purchased it, but I don't know about how much it costs or any of that thing. So sorry about that.
No, you're good. It's good to look up. Thank you. Anyone else how did you revamp your process? Whether you were a candidate searching, was there anything you had to do differently? Or as an employer, were there new considerations maybe that Shayna didn't mention?
So looking at it from the search process side, like someone who was searching, I really looked at my digital footprint because really that was the way that people were going to be able to find me. So I had some colleagues who had signed up for a LinkedIn like course and sent me all of their course materials. And so I really revamped my LinkedIn profile, added in a lot of things that like I had forgotten about or hadn't done. And I was like, no, we're going to make everything look the way that it does. And I was also really picky about making sure that work that I had done during the pandemic was reflected in my resume and that it was saved as a PDF so it wouldn't get messed up in people's software. I also expanded out the ways that I was looking for jobs. So I had previously had just stuck with higher ed jobs, and basically that was where I found most things. But I started to look at LinkedIn and see what positions they had, particularly in places of like nonprofits that were education related. In case I wanted to leave the field, I wanted to keep those options open for myself and was able to make a couple of connections with those nonprofits, which I think will be valuable as I continue in the field. And I also made sure that my networks knew that I was searching, whether that was via LinkedIn or just the Makuho network, whatever that might look like. It was very open about what that was so that people were aware and could send me things that they saw. Like Brandon sent me a job description that he's like, hey, I think you'd be a good fit for this. And Jocelyn sent me stuff. Like I was very open about that. And that helped me to connect with people and find things that were going to be a good fit for me. So that openness and then making sure that like my digital footprint was up to date was I think key in this particular search process for me.
That's great that so many colleagues had your back. Great. Other folks want to answer and speak a little bit on that question?
Yeah, so I'll expand a little bit beyond what Colleen was talking about. I also was looking at non-higher ed positions, looking back at my undergraduate in plant science and looking at how do I bridge that and my desire to work in education. But I think being a young professional, I was so concerned with staying close to family, being in the New England area, New York, Pennsylvania area, that I needed to expand my search. And so I was looking far beyond what I would normally be looking at. And I think with that, I found the opportunity to come to Ohio and learn a little bit about how higher ed is working out here. And the other piece that I really adjusted in my search was the questions that I was asking during my interview process. I think that COVID really threw all of us. Nobody really knew what we were doing. I think some of us are still kind of like, we don't know what we're doing. We're kind of going at it one day at a time. But I wanted to ask some specific questions about what are institutions doing, specifically within residence life. How are we managing housing? How are we managing isolation and quarantine? And if institutions had a really solid idea or a plan as to what they were doing, I think that it put them higher up on my list, and I felt better about either accepting a position or pursuing that second interview with an institution.
That's a good point. Sometimes we forget like the search goes both ways, even from the candidate's point of view. And these times we were chatting a little even before we started the call, trying to connect with people virtually can be so difficult. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But I'm curious, does anyone have anything else they want to add before we move to the next question?
Just really quickly, we significantly reduced the amount of time that we spent in the search process. I think most of us are used to having like 2, 3 days, but like multiple days of interviews and really long periods of time, maybe an hour. And so we've really thought about like, what are our values? What is important? What do we need to know? And how can we reduce the amount of time someone is participating in this experience? So if it's more smaller level interviews or a half a day versus something we would have done over a course of 2 days, like what's really valuable, what connections do we need to make, and how can we make the most of the time that we have with this individual? Because no one wants to be in an interview for 4 or 5 hours over Zoom. I would think it's challenging for someone to do that. So.
Thank you, Shayna. All right, Jocelyn, if you want to head to the next one.
Absolutely. So this is both for those who are the employers and those who are candidates. What was your greatest concern going through a virtual hiring experience and process? And how did you address it?
I know for me, my biggest concern was technical difficulties. I think that's like a huge, obvious one. The job that I actually just accepted last week, my lights went off during one of the interviews in the middle of the house. And, I live on. So, what could I really do? So I'm just talking away, and then the fire alarm starts to go off and the lights start to go off. And thank God it was towards the end of one of the multiple interviews that I had. And they were like, are you okay? Is everything okay over there? I'm like, I'm okay. I was like, I can keep going. They were like, no, like you answered all the questions successfully. Like you're good. Like, take a minute, refocus, get yourself together. And when I sent follow-up emails after that, they were like, you handled it very well. Cause I try not to let them see me sweat, but internally I was like, okay, like the worst possible thing that could happen while I'm interviewing virtually did happen. So I think for me, technical difficulties was like my main concern.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow, what an experience.
I think my biggest concern was finding an appropriate place to do my interviews. I left my previous position in June, went and moved in with family, and so now I have parents, 2 siblings, some barking dogs that just would not stop. And so being able to find that professional setting was really important because we're so used to being on a campus and not having these other distractions. And so very similar to what Chancey's talking about with all of these like noises happening and technical issues, I think that was my biggest concern. And it was, I scheduled the kitchen and I was like, this is when I'm using it. Do not come in. Don't turn on that blender. This is my time. Get out.
Same here. My concern was, where am I going to do this? Because I have a husband and a 3-year-old who really wants to see what's happening on the screen. If you ever sat in one of our SHO calls, you know that Amelia loves to make an appearance. So that was something I needed to work out with my husband of like, okay, we had a space in our temporary apartment that was basically filled with boxes, and we rearranged it so that I would have a space to be in. And then a couple of days, he literally took her away to her parents. They went to the zoo. So making those arrangements with family to be like, hey, this is what's happening and I need you to be here. But it was also a really good way to gauge how institutions felt about kids and family. So my daughter popped up in like my intro kind of interview with my now boss and our admin assistant. And I was like, Amelia, no, you gotta go. And Carrie's like, no, 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 I want to see her. Let's, and like that kind of moment, I was like, oh, this is a good place. This is a good place. If they're like, yeah, it's totally okay. So that was a really good indication for me that that people could move beyond the we're in a weird space where your children are going to pop up on your video occasionally and it's okay.
I think from an employer standpoint, one of the challenges or concerns we had was like about fit, right? So you have somebody come to campus, you get to kind of like vibe them out, you see them in person, you get, that it's not the same, even though like right now in our Zoom, I love seeing everybody's amazing faces. It's just not the same, right? You can't have that same interpersonal connection, the same dialogue. And so for Del Val, we are so small, like it's me and a coordinator and 2 live-in professionals. So fit really matters. And that's kind of hard to feel out in Zoom calls and going kind of back to back. But I agree with Shane and what you said about like really figuring out what was essential and what we were doing and who we were interviewing. We cut out a lot of stuff that we realized was just a whole bunch of fluff that wasn't as important as what we thought first.
I would agree with Carrie. Right? You want to put your best foot forward also as an employer, and it's a courting process, at least in my mind. And Brandon can tell you how well I courted him, right? And so, but it's hard to do that virtually. It's almost like online dating, which I hope that doesn't feel inappropriate, but it does feel less personal because you're not being able to interact with that person. Asking someone to move across the country when they've never been to campus and they don't have a feel for the city, for the campus, that all those things are challenging. And so and you don't want to lose really amazing candidates because they could not, get the full breadth of what your organization or your campus is like. And so I think we're all going to continue to navigate that piece.
Excellent. I'm interested from the employer standpoint inside. Are there some practices that you're using now that definitely you'll keep once we open back up fully, and we're hopefully one of these days, and once we kind of change the hiring process, are there some things that 100% that you're going to keep as a part of your process?
Carrie, you want to start? All right.
I think for me, it's the leaner, shorter days. It's just not all of that is needed. You don't need to meet with every campus partner in the history of the world. And so I think those shorter, leaner days are more important. We also at times had follow-up conversations with VPs and those sorts of people who couldn't make it on the day. And so I also liked that because it kept the candidates continuously engaged in our process. And so you came to campus, but couldn't meet with our VP. So then we set up a separate time for a phone call or a Zoom meeting. And so that we will likely keep because that gave us a lot of flexibility even in our scheduling around what our days would look like.
I agree. And I don't know that it's necessary to bring people to campus anymore if they can come, and that's an option we can provide, but to still be able to provide a virtual option, I think it's great. I mentioned there's some things that we're trying to do to increase our diversity and inclusion, and we're going to continue to do those things and continue to investigate how we can make the process more inclusive. The only thing that I tend to worry about is depending on someone's ability, virtual is not always easy either, right? We talk about technology and what people have access to. Do they have the type of software at home now that they once had maybe in their office space, to be able to engage in this virtual space and interview in their best way? I won't take credit for it, but a colleague, it was an interview process, and 5 minutes before the interview, they sent them the questions for universal design and also made sure that they were in the chat. So in case that person had some auditory issues or something of that nature. So I just think there's really great practices that we're putting in place that will help improve our overall hiring processes, that we should consider keeping. We shouldn't consider keep, we should keep them.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any others would like to answer? Amanda, you're up next.
So a little bit off script here, just because it's something that's coming up that I think we could all benefit from hearing a little bit more about. So I'm hearing some folks talk about the challenges and the ways that it felt like to make things more inclusive with accessibility and cameras being on, that type of thing, or not having a good space to interview in. So I'm curious if we can talk more about things that, as a candidate who recently went through the process, ways that it could have been made more inclusive for you, or as an employer, things you did or think you could do better to make things more inclusive. I love that, Shayna, what you said about 5 minutes ahead of time saying like, hey, here's the question, so you have something to refer to. That's great. Or putting it in the chat for people to read as well as hear. So that's great. Other folks with any comments about that? I think that's a really good and important part of the conversation.
I feel like this is less specific to COVID and just more HR in general during our processes. As we talk about inclusion and diversity during our search processes, I applied to over 100 different institutions, and there were institutions that the racial and ethnic questions would conflict each other. And so as a white passing Hispanic male, I would select white, but then it wouldn't let me select Hispanic. And so that already kind of puts a bad taste in my mouth for an institution, because I think that that could be an easy fix, as well as when we ask that gender question, you know, what is your gender? And then we list the binary sexes. So I think that as we're thinking more broadly about inclusion, it moves beyond the COVID and interview process.
I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a good point. And oftentimes we see things like that, or we know about that as an employer, and we forget what our power is, right? So that might not be directly in our locus of control, but that doesn't mean it's something we can't advocate around or bring to the forefront of concern. Because chances are, if this is something we're noticing, other folks are noticing it too, and just maybe no one said it or brought it up or raised the question. And sometimes it just takes that one person. Oftentimes it takes a lot more than that one person. But sometimes it just takes that one person. So good conversations we could be having and should be having.
One of the things that I struggled with some of my interviews is that at the director level, sometimes you're doing 9 hours of Zoom plus a presentation, and it can get really overwhelming really fast. Like I often ended those days with a big headache because I was staring at a screen the whole time and I needed to be on the whole time. So making sure that you're building in those breaks for people was really key. I had one where they basically had one Zoom link the entire day. And so I basically just had it on all day. It would, was able to turn off my camera and that kind of stuff. But, when I needed to step away, but that didn't feel like there was a break. So making sure that those breaks are built in for your candidates is super key. I'm actually going to be hiring for 2 positions this spring. So a lot of what we're talking about, and a lot of what my experience was this fall as I was going through my search is going to be reflected in the way that we're asking people to, do we need to ask people to present all the time. You know, what does that mean? What does it mean if someone is unable to, like, maybe they lost their job, they no longer have access to PowerPoint, they don't have a Google email address, so they have no way of making slides or presentation in that kind of way. So making sure that people have the resources that they need and the time that they need in order to show their best selves in that interview process is really important and really key. Like, Zoom fatigue is real, and we have to pay attention to it, especially as we are looking at job interviews and what that looks like. So.
So we're going to switch gears really quickly, and the more traditional route of interviews where you come on campus and you meet everyone and you have lunch and all those kind of fun things. And some of you may spend the night and on campus housing, etc. So we're interested in, for both employers and those who were going through candidate searches, what were the alternatives for that? And if they didn't, did you go to campus? What was that experience for you during COVID?
So I did have a on-campus interview, but there were multiple breaks, which was something that I really enjoyed. And there were different links. So like the link would end. I would get maybe like, I want to say like a half hour to like 45 minutes between each session. So the interview kind of went maybe from like, if you looked at the schedule, it kind of went from like 9:30 to 2, but the first interview wasn't until like 11 a.m. and I met with the director at like 9:45, just like as like an introduction and everything like that. And then, the different sessions had like those half-hour breaks between them. So like that helped a lot because as we all were just saying, Zoom fatigue is really real. But that was like the only type of on-campus experience that personally I had. Just because a lot of places still weren't having people actually come on the campus. But I enjoyed that. It was easy. It gave me time to like go eat, go do other stuff, which like I needed after like looking at a computer screen all day or just like for a long period of time. So it was helpful for me, like really, really helpful.
Thank you so much. Mark, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I had institutions based on kind of where you were at in the process, send out either some supplemental materials like a strategic plan or marketing materials specific to their office. One institution sent a recorded video tour from their admissions folks. So it was, you had the opportunity to see campus from the lens of a student. And you got to hear from a student leader on campus without actually having to go there. So I think, Shana was talking about it earlier, we're expecting candidates to fly across the country and come to an institution that they've never seen. And for me, like, I'm a touchy-feely person, and Carrie now knows that I went to Del Val. Like, when I got to Del Val, I saw it and I was like, oh, this is really pretty. I want to be here. And I think that's something that's really important for professionals as we pick our institutions.
I had only 2 places that did campus tours. One basically showed me around campus via pictures, talked about different traditions around particular buildings. And then the other one kind of walked me through a campus map. One of the things I did when I was hiring an area coordinator at Susquehanna was go and do like video walkthroughs of the office. And then I also did a video walkthrough of the apartment that person would be going into. Because I thought it was really important for people to see, like, this is what your office is going to look like. This is what your home is going to look like, so that they could make decisions based on what they were going to be going into. So, and the feedback that we got from the candidates was that it was really helpful. Basically just uploaded them to YouTube and provided them with a private link so that they could do it on their own time. It wasn't something that they needed to do on their interview day as well. So as as I'm going into this search process, I'm probably going to do the same thing to allow folks to have that opportunity, because people can see pictures, and lots of people do like 3D room tours and that kind of stuff on their websites already. And so I don't know if the campus is the campus tour is really as much as it needs to be. But here's where you're going to live and here's where you're going to work are super important to people, and they should be highlighted as the places that you make sure people see, even if they can't set foot on their campus. Like, I didn't set foot on Hartwick's campus until I had to come for a COVID test in order to be able to start my first day of work a week later. And I was totally lost. But I had a good sense of what my office was going to look like, and what the area was like based on the conversations that I had. So that was really important.
I feel like that's a whole other interesting conversation about virtual onboarding 2021, virtually unprecedented. We could have a whole other one. So I'm sure you all would have stories to tell about that. But anyone else for that question before I move to our last one?
I just wanted to add on to what Mark said. We use some of the similar digital resources that Mark was referring to, and I think really partner with your admissions. I didn't recreate, they created a campus tour for the admissions process for prospective students. Say that 3 times fast. So instead of us trying to recreate those things, we just use what they are sending out to prospective students to send out to colleagues or individuals who are candidates in our process, along with our strategic plan and things of that nature. And we also have digital assets in housing and residential life, where you can virtually go through all of our residence halls and things in 360 tours. But I think like you don't have to, replicate things that others have already created. Use your campus partners to create a virtual experience for your candidates as well.
Thank you. Anyone else on that one before I breeze right past that? Okay. So before we open up for any questions from our attendees, so attendees, start thinking if there's specific questions you want to ask folks. Feel free to start brainstorming those. But I'm just curious, as we wrap up and panelists who are preparing to talk to us today and thinking about what you might want to share, what haven't we asked, or what haven't you gotten to share yet that's kind of pressing that you're like, this is something that I think that people are going to want to know from me, or this is an experience I had that I want to highlight?
Silence is a good sign. That means we covered everything.
Your questions were so thorough. That's beautiful. Well, in this case, then I will open it up for questions. Oh, there's a question in the chat, so I will share here. Brian wrote, as interviewers and interviewees have navigated the process in the past year, how have your identities, power, and privilege impacted the process? So who would like to take that one first?
I'll take it. So as I mentioned earlier, being a white passing Hispanic man, like that comes with a level of privilege and a level of hidden identity. And so coming to the Midwest, even now, I do not listen to Spanish music if I am driving around Bowling Green, Ohio, because there's a lot of anti everything that isn't white. And being a very openly queer person, I have to think about the spaces that I am in, and not being able to come to Bowling Green before I took the job definitely hinders that. Like I have sparkly loafers under my desk right now. My nails are painted copper and sparkles and all the great things. And I have to think about what that looks like when I leave campus, because although campus is very liberal, the surrounding area is not. And I find my pockets of community here.
Thank you for sharing that. I can only empathize that must have been difficult.
We have another question in the chat. What are ways interviewees can stand out during virtual interviews?
The good ways and the bad ways. Ways you want to stand out, maybe ways you do not want to stand out.
I think that's a challenging question. I was talking with someone about it today, and how you come across in Zoom can be very, like, I feel like I smile a lot more. I don't know if I did that in person, but now I'm very aware of it. And I think it's very different to see yourself the way others are seeing you. Um, and it's harder to know. I think Carrie spoke about this. Like, it's harder to know if you're actually connecting with someone or not. And so just be your authentic self, be confident and bring all of you to the table. And if they are ready for you, it will happen. And if they're not, they're not. And that wasn't the place that was meant for you. And so I don't know that there's anything significantly different that I would say that you should do to stand out. Um, and just be transparent and honest. I was in a situation today where my dog was barking in the beginning of the interview. And I had to say to them, like, I'm a puppy mom, and he thinks someone's at the door. So he's doing his job trying to protect our family, and you might hear him. And so let's embrace that. And you just have to be who you are. I think Colleen spoke to it about her daughter. She's a mom first, and her daughter coming into the interview frame and not dismissing her child, and saying, like, this is part of my reality, and that's going to be her reality as a director. So I just say, try to be confident and show up as your authentic self, and do your best. It's really all you can do.
Thank you for that. That's good advice. That's probably the most important way to stand out, and that's going to pay off in the end at the end of your search. Anything else for folks around that question before we move to the next one?
I think a follow-up I have to that is hiring managers who have done the Spark Hire process. Could you talk to us more about maybe ways that people can stand out or kind of prepare better for those interviews? Those are more up and coming. And I think a lot of us haven't gone through that one-way interview process. So is there any tips or advice that you would give?
So Brad and I work at the same institution, so he knows about Spark Hire. Brad, I think it's challenging. The way that Spark Hire works, and I have not used it personally, I've only had a tutorial on how it works, is that they try to replicate an in-person interview as much as possible. So you won't learn the questions until you're there that day. Um, and the way our institution uses it, the first question where you get to talk a little bit about yourself and the position, you can re-record it, but after that you are not allowed to re-record it, and you have 5 minutes to prepare for each question, and it's timed. So still do the same amount of preparation that you would if it was an in-person interview. I always advise my colleagues and folks that I mentor, you need to read the job description, know what competencies they're looking for, what requirements they have, and have 10 experiences prepared and ready to go so that you can quickly pull them out of your Rolodex and be able to answer those questions. So it was good for me to know that it's timed, because I think most of us would think, if I'm recording it and is at my own pace, it's 6 to 8 questions. I have an infinite amount of time to do it. But once you start recording a question, you have 5 minutes to prepare, and then it's timed. So that's the only advice that I have, is to be prepared before you go into the scenario, so that you don't want to be caught off guard and run out of time, just like you would not want to do that in person. Um,
Thank you. All right, then we will move on to our next question. So the next one is, Brandon said, I think this goes beyond the pandemic, but I'm curious, for those in the hiring chair, what gets your attention in reviewing materials? Because they seem to be coming in by the truckload. So whether that's for reasons due to the pandemic or hiring freezes being lifted, and all of a sudden there's lots of positions opening, It's a busy time. So those materials, what gets your attention?
When you highlight the things in the job description that match your resume. So your resume looks, you're highlighting the stuff that we are looking for. Because honestly, I don't read cover, I skim cover letters and then I'll read them as we pull in people closer. But I'm looking at that, the resume to go, okay, do they have the skills that I'm looking for that are based on the resume? So tailoring that resume is super helpful. It also helps get you through, sometimes it helps you get you through some of the HR mechanisms that can flush out candidates.
And putting them at the top, right? And so like when y'all got like 17 bullets under one area or one job, I'm sure we do all of those, right? Like I look at my resume and I'm like, that's a lot. But the ones that are connected to the job I'm applying for, I put those at the top because nobody's reading all 17 bullets if you've had 4 or 5 jobs, right? So I think exactly what Colleen said, connecting it back to the skills that they're specifically saying they're looking for in the job description and then putting them at the top so people can see them. I love a good cover letter, that like something that make, like you say, like that you did or you created or that you made happen at your school that makes you stand out. But keeping it to like one page, I think is also really important. I have no time or energy to read a 4-page cover letter. So that would be my advice.
Unless you've been doing this for like 30, 40 years, I don't know why you would have a 4-page cover letter, but I agree. It's so hard. I think most of us have HRs, departments that do initial screenings, at least mine does. So if 80 people apply, I might see 30 or 20 of them. And so if you have any opportunity, if there's a posting and you can send your information also to that person who's the hiring manager, I would encourage that as well, because there's been plenty of times people have emailed me directly and I've had to say to my HR, like, why didn't this person get through? Because this is exactly what I'm looking for. And so if you can, if there is a hiring person that you could send your materials to, sometimes hiring firms, search firms work with institutions depending on the level of position. Those help as well to get you through the process.
Thank you so much, Shanna. So our last question that's in the chat is, what is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew before the interview process? And that this is particularly for interviewers. Great question. And possibly particularly for those who have landed the job or, you know, those who didn't necessarily get it, but was like, whew, I bet, you know, got the bullet. So I missed the bullet, dodged that bullet. So any particular cases for those who have completed their searches and have found the jobs that they wanted?
I think this is something I learned just from a typical job search, not particularly the COVID job search, is to remember that we are interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing us. I had an institution and I asked a question about diversity and inclusion, and their response was, we have a committee and we do a training. And that was it. And that for me was like the nail in the coffin. And I was like, you're not doing enough for me. And I also think, like, remember at the end of the day, this is still an interview. A lot of the skill sets that we already have for interviewing is going to be utilized. And now we're just all on Zoom. And take a deep breath, do that power stance, I forget what they're called, where you like stand in the bathroom, arms above the head. Like, I did that, and somebody that interviewed me caught me doing it, and they were like, you're funny.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Mark. I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but what I've heard from colleagues on both sides of the table, they wish they would have known how exhausting it is to be doing all of this virtually. And I'm curious if that's been the case for all of you. I'm seeing a lot of head nods, so I don't think I'm totally off base there.
I think it's more tiring
Super
than in
exhausting.
person, just in my opinion, because I think in the in person you can feed off of people's energy, and here it's like you really have to like dig deep and find it.
Really exhausting, honestly. And going back to what Mark said, like in terms of like we're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing us. Like I know before I had completed my search, I was interviewing with another institution and they just did not look interested at all. And it kind of just left a bad taste in my mouth because, you know, I was just like, okay, well, you know what? I know I'm probably not going, you know, to the next round or whatever the case may be, but I ended up moving on and I was like, oh, I'm shocked. And so, I mean, but I guess I'm learning how, like, you know, not to take it personal too, because like, you know, maybe I just took it that way because literally like when you interview in person, and I just think back to all my experiences at MAPC, like I never really saw how I could come off sometimes because I didn't have a camera sitting right in front of me. But I was able to see how other people were always able to come off. And now that like I'm able to actually like completely focus on that because, you know, when we're in these job conferences and we're in like these big rooms, there's so much going on and like you're trying to stay focused. And obviously, you know, maybe sometimes like, you know, your eyes will wander this way or that way. But like with this, it's like I see you, you see me, and you know, definitely it is exhausting. So I'm trying to like, you know, give myself grace, but also give like employers, like I was trying to give employers that same grace, just because, you know, it's tiring for all of us.
Yeah, that's real. That's a good point. Even from the few interviews that I've done as an employer, I've tried to provide energy because I know that they're tired and they're going through it. So trying to be welcoming. And we had one candidate explicitly say, like, thank you for being so welcoming and like friendly during this interview. And it made me question or wonder, like, it made me sad because I was like, what other kind of interviews are you having that you're feeling so dismissed or that type of thing? So I think that's important to remember because, like Mark said, the interview goes both ways and you're looking for candidates too. And you also just don't want to have that reputation as someone who's not welcoming in any way. Okay, well, anything else from our panelists before we wrap up? Okay, all right, well, just one last huge thank you so much to all of our panelists. We appreciate your time. We know how busy all of you are. So thank you so much. And I know more people will even benefit from having this recording on the website as our candidates through Makuho are searching and our employers. I know that they will find this helpful. And even myself, I have plenty of information to take back to my grads who are searching. So thank you so much for your time. And Jocelyn, I'll let you invite folks to the next one.
Absolutely. So just a quick plug for our next webinar. And we're going to do these series every month. And so before I plug the next one for March, if you by any chance, you know, are interested in a certain topic or you would like to be a panelist and really have some really good information to share, I'm going to put our information in the chat, our emails, so that you can reach out to myself or Amanda so that we can make sure that we feature you for our next webinar. So our March webinar will be March 24th on a Wednesday at 12 p.m. And it's titled An Email Isn't Enough, Supporting Students During National Crisis. Dr. Ann Newman, Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at Rutgers, and Dr. Komal Chandra, Residence Coordinator at NJIT, will be our panelists for that webinar. So we're super excited to hear from them and learn a little bit more about what they're doing at their institutions, and we hope that you all join us as well.